The cabin, sealed by the plantation owner in 1858, what the restoration crew found inside is haunting in February of 2021. A restoration contractor named Daniel Reyes stood in front of a cabin door in rural Georgia that had not been opened since 1858. The door was held shut by 47 hand-forged iron nails, driven so deep into the oak frame that his crew had to cut through the wood around them. Behind that door was a single room, sealed on the direct orders of the plantation owner himself, with written instructions that it never be opened. For 163 years, nobody did. When the door finally came free, the air that rolled out of that room was cold enough to fog their breath in the Georgia heat. And what the crew found inside made 2 grown men quit the job that same afternoon. Before we open that door together, do one thing: hit subscribe. Every week on this channel, we pry open a sealed room, a buried record, a piece of history that somebody powerful wanted forgotten. Next week's story is darker than this one, and you do not want to miss it. Now, back to the cabin. To understand what was inside, you first need to understand the man who sealed it, and why anyone in 1858 would spend real money nailing a door shut instead of simply burning the building to the ground. That is the first strange detail in this story. Burning a slave cabin cost nothing. Sealing one cost him a blacksmith, 2 carpenters, 3 days of labor, and enough brick to close every window from the outside. He did not want the cabin gone. He wanted it held shut. The property was called Hollow Creek, a cotton plantation of about 900 acres in Wilkes County, Georgia, owned by a man named Edmund Vance. The records that survive paint Vance as an ordinary planter of his time, which is to say a man who built his fortune on the forced labor of 41 enslaved people, whose names appear in his ledgers as property, listed between livestock and farm equipment. Most of those names come down to us as first names only: Isaac, Mary, Solomon, Tice. But one entry is different from all the others. One entry has no name at all. In the inventory of 1,855, in Vance's handwriting, there is a line that reads, "The woman in the far cabin." No name, no age. No value written in the price column, which is the only entry in 41 lines where that column sits empty. Every other human being on that property had a price. She did not. The far cabin sat at the edge of the tree line, nearly a quarter mile from the other quarters, past the smokehouse, past the well, out where the cleared land gave way to old pine. The other cabins were built in a row, close together, easy to watch. Hers stood alone. And according to the one surviving account we have from someone who actually lived at Hollow Creek, a 1937 interview with a formerly enslaved man named Peter Ash, a boy on that plantation in the 1850s, the woman in the far cabin was the person people went to at night, when a child was burning with fever, when a man's back was torn open, when somebody needed something the overseer could not know about. Ash was 92 years old when he gave that interview, and the transcript survives in the Library of Congress. He talked easily about the fields, the food, the cruelty, but when the interviewer asked about the far cabin, the transcript notes that Ash went quiet for a long moment. Then he said only this: "We did not knock on her door. We stood in the yard and waited, and she came out when she came out. And you did not look through her window. Not ever." The interviewer, doing his job, asked why not. Ash's answer is one sentence, and it is the sentence that made researchers pull this file decades later. He said, "Because the window did not always show you her cabin." Nobody knows what he meant. He refused to say another word about it, and he died the following spring. Hold that sentence in your mind, because by the end of this story you are going to understand why it matters. Between 1856 and 1858, something went badly wrong at Hollow Creek. The county records show it plainly, even though they never explain it. In the spring of 1856, Vance's youngest son drowned in a creek that Ash described as barely knee-deep. That winter, Vance's wife stopped appearing in church registries, and a doctor from Washington, Georgia, billed the plantation 11 times in 4 months, always for the same complaint: night terrors and wasting. In the autumn of 1857, the overseer, a man named Rennick, who had worked the property for 9 years, walked off the job without collecting his final pay. no letter, no forwarding address. A man abandoned money owed to him in 1857, which simply did not happen and vanished from every record in the state of Georgia. And then there is the ledger. Vance's plantation ledger for these years survives in the University of Georgia's special collections, and it is an ordinary document: seed purchases, cotton weights, doctor's bills, until you reach March of 1858. That month, the handwriting changes, not to a different person's hand, to a worse version of Vance's own, shaky, pressed hard into the paper. And in that shaking hand there are 3 purchases that stand out from every page before them. 400 iron nails, salt, in a quantity 20 times what a household would use, and a payment to 2 carpenters from Augusta for what the ledger calls, in Vance's own words, the quieting of the far cabin. Not the ceiling, not the closing, the quieting. The work took 3 days in late March of 1858. The windows were bricked from the outside. The chimney flue was capped with an iron plate, and the door was nailed shut with those hand-forged nails, driven through the door and deep into the frame, 47 of them, so many that the door and the frame effectively became a single piece of wood. When it was done, Vance had a wrought iron fence built around the cabin, and he wrote a clause into his will, which also survives, stating that the far cabin and the ground it stands on shall not be opened, entered, altered, or disturbed by any heir or purchaser of this property, so long as one stone of it stands upon another. Here is what the will does not mention. Anywhere, in any line. What happened to her? There is no bill of sale, no record of death, and Vance recorded the deaths of enslaved people because they were property losses, he claimed. No name in the county death registry. The woman in the far cabin appears in the 1855 inventory, and then she never appears in any document again. The cabin was sealed in March of 1858, and the last written trace of the woman who lived in it simply stops. Vance himself lasted 2 more years. Neighbours' letters describe him in that time as a man who would not go near his own tree line, who had every dog on the property sold off because, in the words of one letter, he could no longer abide their barking at nothing in the night. He died in 1860, and the war came, and Hollow Creek passed through 6 owners over the next century and a half. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Every single one of them honoured the will. Through Reconstruction, through the boll weevil years, through the Depression, when that land was worth almost nothing, and the iron in those nails alone had scrap value, 6 different families, most of whom never met each other, left that cabin exactly as it was. One of them, in 1934, went further. He reinforced the fence. People who inherit a strange clause in an old will usually test it. Nobody tested this one. Which brings us back to February of 2021, when a Heritage Foundation purchased the property to restore it as a historical site, and a court quietly voided the old restriction, and Daniel Reyes and his crew of 5 walked the 1/4 mile past the old well, out to the tree line, and started cutting. The first thing they noticed was the cold. It was 59 degrees outdoors. The laser thermometer they used to check for moisture problems read the interior wall of the cabin through a gap in the brick at 33 degrees. 1 degree above freezing in a sealed wooden structure in Georgia, with no explanation any building engineer has been able to offer since. The second thing they noticed, once the door came free and their lights went in, was that the room was not empty. It was set. That is the word Reyes used in the Foundation's incident report, which is a public document, and it is the right word. A table stood in the centre of the single room, laid with a plate, a cup, and a folded cloth, positioned as if someone were expected for a meal. A chair was pulled out from the table, not tipped over. Pulled out, angled, the way a chair sits when someone has just stood up from it. On the plate was a dark residue that lab analysis later identified as cornbread and sorghum, and the analysis noted something the technicians flagged 3 separate times in their write-up, because they could not make it make sense. The food had dried. It had never rotted. In 163 years, in a sealed room in the Georgia climate, nothing in that cabin had rotted, no insect husks, no rodent droppings, no mold. The report describes the interior with a phrase that was written by a laboratory scientist aboard and reads like something else entirely. The room presents as recently vacated. Every mirror surface in the cabin, a small looking glass and a polished tin pan had been turned to face the wall. A line of salt, unbroken after a century and a half, ran across the inside of the doorway. Not the outside, the inside. And when the crew examined the door itself, laid flat in the yard with its 47 nails still buried in it, they found the detail that ended 2 men's careers in restoration that same afternoon. The inside face of the door was covered in scratches, deep, splintered gouges, hundreds of them, concentrated around where the latch had been. The foundation brought in a forensic consultant, because the assumption was that a woman had been nailed inside that room and died trying to claw her way out. The consultant confirmed the gouges were made from the inside, confirmed they were made by human hands, and that whoever made them had worked at that door for a long, long time. But that is not why the men quit. They quit because of the direction. Every scratch on that door, every single one, ran horizontally, calm, level, repeated strokes, layered over each other in patterns. The consultant's report states that the marks were not consistent with panic. They were consistent with deliberation. Someone inside that sealed room had spent time, possibly years, carving at the inside of that door in slow, patient, even lines. And when the consultant photographed the door under angled light, the scratches were not random at all. Together they formed rows of small, careful marks grouped in clusters. Counting marks. Thousands of them. Someone inside that cabin had been keeping track of the days. And here is the end of it, the part that the Foundation has never put on any interpretive sign at the site, though every word of it is in the public record. The crew searched that single room down to the dirt beneath the floorboards. They found the table, the mirrors, the salt, the counting marks, a woman's shoes by the hearth, and a cold their equipment recorded but could not explain. They never found her. No remains. No bones. Not a fragment. In a room that was nailed shut from the outside, bricked at every window, capped at the chimney, and never once opened in 163 years. The scratches say someone was in there, counting days, long after the door was sealed. The room says someone kept it, swept it, set the table, and the physical evidence says that whoever she was not inside it when the door finally opened. There was no way out of that cabin. She found one anyway. Remember what Peter Ash said, the old man who was a boy at Hollow Creek, the man who went silent when they asked about her. The window did not always show you her cabin. Historians dismissed that line for 80 years as the confusion of a 92-year-old man. But stand where the restoration crew stood, in a room that stayed cold and clean and waiting for a century and a half, and ask yourself what a child could have seen through that window in 1856 that he still would not describe on his deathbed. Maybe Edmund Vance was not trying to keep something from getting out of that cabin. Every protection in that room, the salt on the inside of the door, the mirrors turned inward, faced the wrong way for that. They were arranged by someone inside, guarding against something outside. Vance nailed the door, and his son drowned in knee-deep water, and his wife wasted in the night, and his overseer fled, and his dogs barked at the tree line until he sold every one of them. He called it the quieting of the far cabin. But sealed rooms do not stay quiet, they wait. The cabin still stands at the edge of that tree line in Wilkes County. The Foundation restored the plantation house, the smokehouse, the well. The far cabin they left alone, and if you take the tour, the visitor path curves wide around the iron fence, and no guide will walk you closer. Ask them why, and you will get a smile and a line about structural safety. Ask the restoration crew, the ones who still take calls about it, and you will get a different answer. Reyes gave his in one sentence, at the end of his incident report, in a line his employer asked him to remove, and he refused. He wrote, "We resealed the door, and I want it in the record that this was the correct decision." 47 new nails, driven from the outside. Some doors are not nailed shut to keep the past in. Some are nailed shut because somebody, a long time ago, understood exactly what was on the other side, and paid good money to make sure the rest of us never would. Peter Ash was buried in the spring of 1938, 11 miles from Hollow Creek, and he took whatever he saw through that window with him. The counting marks on the door were photographed and archived, and nobody has ever published a full count. One young archivist started. She stopped past 4,000 and noted, in the margin of her worksheet, that the clusters do not end at the edge of the door. They continue onto the frame. The counting did not stop when the room was opened in 2021. Something in Wilkes County is still keeping track of the days. The only question left is what it is waiting for.